Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sean Griffin with the American Sustainable Business Council. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're pleased to have some guests with the from the USDA with us today. They are going to begin their presentation shortly, and at the end, we will follow that up with Q&A. If you are joined via the web, there should be a control panel accessible to you. In the top left corner of that control panel is a hand that allows you to ask a question. If you raise that question or your hand on the question button there, it will put you into a queue and I can chat you via the web platform and make sure that you're okay asking your question. And we look to begin that at about 20 of 3. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Richard Idland. Thanks so much, Richard.
Good. Thanks, Sean, and good afternoon, and good morning to anyone who's still in California or on the West Coast. This is Richard Idland. I'm Policy Director for the American Sustainable Business Council, and welcome to our webinar today on building strong local and regional food systems. And as Sean indicated, we have two great guests this afternoon from the United States Department of Agriculture. And before we get going, I want to just give a little context. The ASBC has been working on a number of sustainable agriculture issues, particularly the Farm Bill of 2012 and then this year in 2013. And a lot of our focus regarding that has been concentrated on issues such as capital access for small farmers, helping to encourage local food systems, and providing training dollars that can support early stage farmers, and essentially trying to build out local food ecosystems that we think are a great way to not only revitalize rural communities, but provide healthy food to urban consumers and make the connection between food and a stronger economy. The purpose of this call is to learn a bit more about USDA's programs and then to build from that by creating stronger relationships with USDA, and on a separate note to go back to Capitol Hill and continue to advocate for what we think are important elements within the Farm Bill. With that, let me introduce two of our colleagues who were very active in helping to put this together and whose own organizations have been involved in local food systems. The first is Leanne Kruger Brannicky, and Leanne is with the National Business Alliance for Local Living Economies. And Leanne, if you would, just describe a little bit about what Bali's doing on these issues.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everybody. Again, this is Leanne Kruger-Brannicky from Bali, and we're pleased to be co-hosting this webinar today with ASBC. And I know that a number of Bali members and Bali Local Economy Fellows are on the phone as well, so hi to you as well. So Bali is the fastest growing alliance of values-aligned entrepreneurs, business networks, and local economy funders in North America, representing 30,000 locally owned businesses across the continent. And Bali and our members have been working on local food systems for a long time. We coined the term local first and have grown up alongside the local food movement. In addition, a number of our Bali Local Economy Fellows are actively working on local food systems issues, and I know a number of them are already partnering with the USDA in their regions. So we're excited to be here and excited to make this opportunity available to our members and fellows to learn more about what the USDA is up to.
Great, thank you, Leanne. And let me now turn to Bob Junk. And Bob is the local economy manager with the FAPEN Economic Development Council in Pennsylvania. And Bob's group, like Bali, is a partner organization of the American Sustainable Business Council. And Bob is also the co-chair of the ASBC Sustainable Ag Working Group. So, Bob, welcome. Okay, and Sean, do we have Bob live there?
Bob, you should be unmuted if you want to go ahead and try saying something for us. May have some audio issues here, so I'll keep his line open in case he does
Okay.
hop on, but Richard, you can move on in the meantime.
Okay. Okay, good. Sorry about that. I will just mention that Bob's been working a lot on these issues on Capitol Hill, and when we get him, he'll update us on that. So let me now turn to our two guests from USDA, Eleanor Starmer and Jim Barham. Eleanor is USDA's national coordinator for their local and regional food systems program. And in that capacity, she advises USDA leadership, including Secretary Vilsack, on issues related to food systems, food development, and coordinates the Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food initiative. And Elanor has worked on agricultural issues for a long time, including doing some work in Latin America. Jim, with the USDA, is an agricultural economist within the Marketing Services Division of USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service Program. And Jim has also worked abroad in the Middle East, Africa, and the Caribbean, and is particularly focused on the issue of regional food hubs and food value chains and food distribution systems. So we are very thrilled to have the both of you, Eleanor and Jim, on the phone with us today to tell us more about the Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food program.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard, and thanks everyone for attending and for organizing this great session. We're really excited to be here. I'm going to start off just by talking really briefly about local and regional food systems as they fit into USDA's work. Talk a little bit about some of the programs that we have available to support this work, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jim, who's going to cover a specific area that we are seeing a lot of interest in, and that's food hubs. And then I'll return at the very end to talk through a couple tools and resources that we have on our website that I hope folks on the phone will find useful and interesting. So to kick us off, Jim, if you want to forward the slide along. All right, I don't think I need to explain to anyone on the call what we're talking about when we're talking about a local and regional food system. It sounds like most folks will have a good sense of what that means. I will just say that within USDA, we do not have a universal definition that we use to define local and regional food systems. It's obviously an evolving concept, and we want to, give space to that. But we do have a couple different reasons why we think it's important. Secretary Vilsack, our chief here at USDA, has identified local and regional food systems development as one of 4 pillars of USDA's economic development work this term. So that has really helped elevate this area of work within the overall USDA portfolio. And why is it something that we're so focused on? Well, I would say that even though we are a massive institution with a lot of different missions and goals, local and regional food systems is an area that we've found has helped, will help us meet a number of those goals. There's evidence that it creates economic development opportunities. There's evidence that it creates educational opportunities for communities, for children. When you're talking about kids in particular, there's evidence to suggest that the more that kids know about where their food comes from, the more they're involved in growing it, the more willing they are to consume healthy foods and the better their diet is over their lifetime. Sometimes the products we know can be fresher. Now, of course, we do have national and international supply chains that have evolved to be pretty efficient, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that when you've got a shorter supply chain, you have nutritional value that comes with that. And then, of course, increased access to healthy foods in communities that don't have access. So that's just a small sampling of the reasons why we think this work is important. Getting back, though, to the main area of interest, I think, for this group, which is economic development. We are still doing research on this, and it's an area where a lot more research needs to be done. But the research that we have done and that we're seeing from the field suggests that this does have some great potential in terms of economic development opportunities. This graph that you're looking at here is from an USDA Economic Research Service study that was done in 2010. They looked at 5 different products in different parts of the country, and they interviewed farmers who were either selling direct to consumers, selling through what are called intermediated markets, which is a local market, but it's through an institution or a grocer or a restaurant, or selling into the mainstream supply chain. And what they found was that for these products, producers who were selling locally made between 55% more and 650% more than their colleagues who were selling into mainstream markets. That to us suggests, and this was what the study concluded, that in a local and regional food system, a lot more of the money is kept at the farm level, at the community level, and that money circulates and has multiplier effects as well. So how does USDA coordinate this work? We do it through something called the Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food initiative, which is USDA's vehicle to strengthen the way that we work on local and regional food systems. It was started in 2009. It's an effort of the Secretary's office. Deputy Secretary Kathleen Merrigan, who was with us until she left the department earlier this year, was really the pioneer of this work starting when she came into office in 2009. And it has a couple different elements. One is a task force, which is folks from all across the department. We have about 50 people who are currently part of the task force, and that group explores ways to make USDA's programs work more effectively for all of the stakeholders involved in local and regional. And it also does training for USDA staff to work with these customers. We have our website, which I will talk about in more detail later, but I'll just say that the idea with the website is that it can be a one-stop shop for financial and technical resources related to local and regional food. So I'll get into that a little bit more later. And then another key communications tool that I'll talk about at the end is the Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food Compass, which has a pretty cool interactive map that I think will be a great resource for many of you. So that's the idea behind the initiative. But as I said, part of the initiative's work is really coordinating across our department because we do have so many different resources that are available, whether it's for a business, for an economic development council, local government entities, schools, or the nonprofits and producers that you're working with. USDA has a range of resources, and we wanted to find a way to bring them together to ensure that they were coordinated and to publicize them. On the production side, and I'm just going to give a couple examples of some of the programs that we have, but again, at the end of the seminar, I will talk about some tools that we've got to really help you guys dig into these programs and figure out which ones are right for you or for the folks that you're working with. So on the production side, in 2010, as part of the Know Your Farmer initiative, USDA launched a seasonal high tunnel project where we are helping farmers build high tunnels or hoop houses, as they're called where I come from, which really helps them extend the season so they can sell for later into the year. And some places they're now selling year-round out of these high tunnels. We've built, just since 2010, 8,700 of these on farms across the country, and they're available in both rural and urban areas. So the photo you see on the right here is of an urban farmer in Cleveland, Ohio. Another piece of the production end of things is credit. And our farm service agency makes loans to farmers to start a farm, to cover operating expenses, to purchase farm storage facilities, so that can include cold storage for fruits and vegetables. In 2010, in fact, we announced that farm storage facility loans should be available for this cold storage purpose. And so that's also been something that's helped with the local and regional food end. And we're working with FSA to publicize that as a resource. I'll also mention earlier this year, FSA, the Farm Service Agency of USDA, launched a new microloan program that's targeted to smaller producers. So it provides loans of up to $35,000 with reduced paperwork. And we've done over 3,000 of these microloans just since the beginning of this year. And that's proving to be very helpful for small and mid-sized producers who are engaged in local and regional work. The next program I'll talk about is our Value-Added Producer Grants program. And this is specifically for agricultural producers. And that can also include producer-controlled businesses and co-ops that are doing work. For example, this slide shows a group that created a food hub. I'm not going to talk in detail about that because actually Jim's going to give some more information about this particular food hub later. But I'll just say that this is another way in which we're helping farmers create some of the products that they will then be able to market locally and regionally. Our farm-to-institution work is also really ramping up. And again, don't worry about writing down the names of all these programs because at the end of the session, I'll talk about a tool that'll help you find them. But I just did want to mention that we have resources to plan and implement new farm-to-school programs, to build kitchen equipment and cold storage in a school or a hospital or another institution. and also to develop school and community gardens. And just last year, we launched a new farm-to-school grant program that's been very successful, and that's available to school districts or individual schools to help develop and implement those programs. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Jim to talk a little bit more about one component of our work, which is food hubs, and then I'll be back with you at the end to talk more about some of our website tools.
Great, thank you, Eleanor. So, yeah, I've been heading up a task force on regional food hubs for several years now, and it was really instigated through the Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food initiative. When that initiative was started, we were looking at a variety of priority areas that we wanted to tackle on the local food front. Things like farm to school certainly were there, things like how we can work more closely with producers on the production side, things like the high tunnels, so forth and so on. We actually have a kind of a task force on local meat issues. And one of the things that emerged from our work and our initial kind of investigation of where we wanted to focus our energies was on this issue of distribution. It's something I've been working at USDA for quite some time, and the variety of kind of new local food distribution models that had begun to really emerge, really innovative models to connect producers to larger volume markets. So we established this task force a few years ago. We have really pretty robust agency representation, as you can see there, and we've also been working across other federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, and the private sector. One of our key collaborators in our food hub work is the Wallace Center at Winrock International, and we, along with Wallace and several other national nonprofit organizations and private partners, have established the Food Hub Collaboration. Within this collaboration, we, particularly when we first got started, it was to understand what really is going on here with these new food hub enterprises. And so we carried out an initial survey to really understand the scope and scale of these operations. And then, of course, we also began to identify where are all these food hubs located, and began to list those in a national database. A little further on, just last year, we actually published the Regional Food Hub Resource Guide, and that was our attempt to really first kind of clarify the concept of food hubs, understand the types of impacts they're having on communities, as well as to make available to food hub stakeholders and food system stakeholders generally all the resources that might be able to be available to them or utilized both through USDA, other federal agencies, as well as other foundations and so forth. And then also last year we convened the first national gathering of over 150 food hubs and their supporters to launch a food hub community of practice, which is still in the nascent stage, but the idea there again is to create a network where food hubs can share best practices with each other, leverage resources, and learn about new innovations in the field. So why regional food hubs? And really for us, we saw that clear need for particularly the small and mid-sized farmers being challenged by lack of kind of appropriate scale distribution, processing, marketing infrastructure that would really allow them to take advantage of the growing demand in these growing markets for local food. Yes, farmers have been doing extremely well in the direct marketing channels, whether that's farmers markets or community-supported agriculture, but it's a heck of a lot more difficult for those same small and mid-sized farmers to be able to get accounts with larger institutional markets, grocery chains, restaurants, and so forth. So we were looking at what models would be out there to really connect the two, and food hubs have emerged as that. And I would also like to mention that we have a particular focus on what we call ag of the middle farmers, these mid-sized farms that really, they represent family farms of decent size where most of the income is coming from the farm itself, but not large enough necessarily to compete against the larger farm operations and traditional wholesale market channels, and yet at the same time kind of too large to really effectively tap into those direct marketing channels without actually having to scale back their operations. So for us, we really see it as an opportunity to both support and retain these ag of the middle farmers, as well as encouraging smaller farmers, if they so choose to scale up their operations. So what is a food hub? I've been talking a bit about it, and here's our basic working definition. And you can see it listed here, and there's really several components to it. It's either a business or organization. So a food hub can be a nonprofit organization. It can be certainly a for-profit business, as well as a producer cooperative or even a retail cooperative. And the key piece is it's more defined by its function than its form. So the function is that food hubs are managing that aggregation, distribution, and marketing of source-identified food products. And what I mean by source-identified is that the you know when you're buying that product, say as a produce manager at a grocery store, of where that product came from and who grew it, and in some cases how it was grown, the production practices as well. So that identity is carried out throughout the supply chain, ultimately to the end consumer, who knows exactly where that food came from and from whom. And then it is focused on local and regional producers, and it's to strengthen their market opportunities within those local markets. So that's kind of the gist of the definition. I've made a feeble attempt was about 6 months ago, to try to create an image that kind of represents what food hubs do. And so this is my again, kind of somewhat failed attempt. I think it kind of works, but you can see how the basic concept or idea that I was trying to get across was almost thinking of like an hourglass, where it starts out quite broad. Kind of flip that hourglass on its side, of course, but it starts out quite broad with a lot of different types of producers, a lot of small, mid-sized, even large producers, products being aggregated into a central facility, and then it widens back out as that they manage the different distribution channels, whether that's institutions, in some cases direct to the consumer, grocery stores, restaurants, and in other cases you have food hubs who are aggregating product for other distributors. Now, that function in and of itself, you could say, well, any local food distributor in the country, that's what they do, and that is a fair comment. But what food hubs do, and what differentiates them from many just traditional food distributors, is the added services that they provide, both on the producer side, which you can see on the left-hand side here, and then also the added services they provide in the community. So they're intimately linked into the community, which I think obviously resonates with our participants, our attendees today, thinking of sustainable business and sustainable community businesses. Food hubs are very much at the center and core when you think of food distribution, similar types of enterprises. So that gives you some sense of that. And then just to knock you over the head even more with what we're talking about here, here's a number of kind of defining characteristics of food hubs. And the one thing I would mention here is the last 2 points, which are absolutely essential to defining what food hubs are. One is the close relationship they have with producers, providing or finding people to provide the type of technical assistance or capacity building that allows smaller and mid-sized growers to actually be market ready to sell into wholesale accounts. And then that last point there, which is really getting to the triple bottom line of these food hub businesses, is that yes, they aim to be financially viable, but they're also trying to make positive economic, social, and environmental impacts within their community. So I want to give you a little example to kind of ground this. This one is called the local food hub. It's very appropriate. I often use this. If you've heard anything about food hubs, this has probably come across your radar only because they're really good at sharing data with us. They're right down the road from us, and they call themselves a food hub, and by all measures, they are one. So it's a good example. And this particular one has two major programs. They have a local food distribution arm, but they also have an educational farm which offers a number of additional services and programs for the community. So a little bit of background on the group. They work with about 75 small and mid-sized farms. They offer a range of products. A large focus is on fresh produce, but they also carry meat, egg, protein products, as well as some value-added products, including those that I've mentioned. And then they service about 150 local customers, several school districts, and a number of restaurants who have really been, that first wave of promoting and buying local food, and then of course a number of grocery stores. And they also have a very good relationship and sell to the University of Virginia Hospital. And there's a little video there, link. We don't have time to show it now, but I recommend checking that out later. It's just about a 3 or 4 minute video that really, I think, captures the relationship between the local food hub and that particular hospital. And this is one of my favorite slides, and actually, since you're sitting at a computer, you can see it. Usually when I present this to a wider audience, it's too small to see, but it really does capture all the different functions and services offered. So on the top, you get to the core kind of distribution, aggregation distribution functions. If you go counterclockwise, you get to more of the production services offered to the growers in their area. On the bottom, you get more to the educational aspect as well. On the right, in terms of their community outreach. So it really does encompass a lot. Not that all food hubs do this by any measure, but they do run a variety of programs that are quite notable. And then just some of the numbers here. I actually need to get back to them and update this because I know they exceeded their 2012 projections. And it's been quite remarkable. A fairly new food hub, hasn't been around that long, started in 2009, really in a pilot phase that year, and then ramped up with pretty notable growth rates. And what I will say is, some people say, well, it's just kind of the exception to the rule, and I'd say this is more the norm for many food hubs. Now, they may have not hit the million mark, maybe most food hubs haven't hit the million mark in 3 years, but what we do see is triple-digit growth in the first 0 to 3 years, and pretty impressive if you're thinking about this time period being during a down economy. And they've also had an opportunity to really measure some of the impacts, and you can see some of that here. I won't go over all of it. You can kind of just read it yourself. But one of the things I do want to point out, and the thing we love to see at USDA, is this stat of 60% of the producers plan to increase production. And one of the things that we're really promoting food hubs for is their ability to bring more producers online to grow the supply of local food, because if there's anything that's basically halting the efforts of local food to be even more robust is a ready and consistent supply of local food. And then there's also been some studies in terms of the economic and social impacts of this particular food hub. The food hub itself creates a number of jobs. Then there's a number of indirect impacts that they have by working with producers who then also increase their production, hire more people, more farm labor, grow their business, and of course the induced impacts it has when that income makes its way back into the community. Again, it's been very impressive, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but basically we're doing a lot of research now to actually, more rigorous research on the economic impacts of food hubs. This gives you a little sense of where the food hubs that we have identified. This is slightly outdated. We have a little over 230 now. This is based on 240 major pockets of food hubs in the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, where we are, in the upper Midwest. And a lot of this, if you were to layer on this, fruit and vegetable production areas and concentrations of small and mid-sized farms, you would get a similar type of pattern. Although I would say the one area, particularly the Southeast and the southern region generally, is not representative or well represented here. But what's one of our target areas as we move forward to see how we could develop more food hubs there with our partners. And again, this provides a little bit of a quick snapshot of the growth of food hubs over the years. One of the things I just pulled was that we've had about almost half of the food hubs start in the last 5 years, so very nascent in many sense. Although certainly there have been food hubs that have been around for a long time. Take the kind of classic producer marketing cooperative who's been focused on local and working with local producers. But then we have all these new enterprises that have emerged. And there's different ways of kind of breaking down or classifying food hubs. For us, you can think about in terms of the legal status, it gives you a little sense that the greatest share of food hubs are actually privately held companies, followed by nonprofits and cooperatives. The more kind of, I think, interesting way to look at classifying food hubs is actually by the market that they sell into. So one of the things, and I'm partially to blame because I often talk about food hubs and the wholesale accounts and tapping into that, but there's a huge number of food hubs that are doing farm to consumer. So there is the food hub there, they're the intermediary, but yet they're selling direct to consumer. So examples of that would be like a multi-farm CSA operation or a online buying club or a mobile market, all of which are still aggregating from a number of producers, but then just selling direct to the consumer. And then the farm to business institution is the more classic food hub selling to wholesale accounts. And then, as you can see, there's 28%, about a third of the food hubs actually do both. And just to give kind of an example here of one of these hybrid food hub models, which Eleanor mentioned earlier, you have Grasshoppers Distribution, which was established, just a little over 5 years ago. They have a multi-farm community supported agriculture, so that's the direct consumer aspect of what they do. But they also are, as you can see here, selling to or serving about 35 public elementary schools with a very strong, part of their mission is certainly that they use the CSA to reach, I would say a higher end clientele, with a little higher margins that they can sell into a more premium product. But then they're strongly interested in increasing healthy food access, and so that's why they have a strong relationship with these elementary schools and with kids on free and reduced lunches. Work with about 75 farmers, anywhere from 6 or so full-time to 5 to 7 part-time. revenue stream about 1.5 in gross annually. They have benefited from USDA in terms of the value-added producer grant that Eleanor mentioned earlier, as well as one of our farmers market promotion grants. And that's one of those misnomers about our farmers market promotion grant program, is that it's actually it's not for farmers markets only. It's really for any kind of direct marketing enterprise. So the multi-farm community supported agriculture aspect of what they're doing was an eligible activity. And they've done recently some really innovative farm-to-school financing. A lot of that, and one of our other partners, Wholesome Way Foundation, who's entered this space in the last 2 years quite successfully, was able to kind of broker a deal and set up a really good business plan for Grasshoppers moving forward, so that they could get a greater investment from their state. And so, Wholesome Wave itself put in kind of a confidence vote of putting $50,000 into investment into this particular food hub, and then we saw, they saw some really remarkable investments by the Kentucky Agriculture Development Board and Finance Corporation, as well as a private investor. Well, a lot of people talk about the financial viability of food hubs. I will say there's a new survey coming out that's going to nail this out of the park. But what we did on our previous surveys, we called up about 20 of the food hubs kind of as a follow-up interview to really dig deeper into their financial viability. And all I mean by that is that they're breaking even or turning a profit from the revenue created from their distribution operation. Half of them were doing that. Another 7 look to be there in about 1 to 3 years. And the one other thing that was interesting, that all 10 financially viable food hubs had gross annual sales over 1 million. And here's a chart for any of you geeks out there that like the stats, and I'm not going to go over too much except for to look at this last category here in terms of annual gross sales, and you can kind of see the sense between currently viable and not. And the kind of magic number out there, if you were to put one, would be about 1.5 to 2 million for food hub primarily selling to wholesale accounts as that kind of break-even point, which for many food hubs can be, depending on their market, depending on the supply base, and just how well they run their operations, they can get into there anywhere from 2 to 4 years. Some of the needs of food hubs going forward, one of the really key lessons we've learned is that there's a lot of the infrastructure is already out there, whether it's warehouses, trucks, all those types of pieces are out there, but they're totally underutilized or not being used in the right way, and how do we make them work better? And so a lot of that is kind of the capital improvements needed to renovate those existing facilities, certainly working capital from business management systems, and there's always a need here because we're constrained by the supply side for enterprise development to producers in order to grow their capacity to meet those buyer requirements. And what's the big picture of all this? Well, I mean, on one level, food hubs have emerged more recently, more radically in the last couple of years because they're filling a market function that isn't adequately being addressed by the current distribution system, and that is aggregation distribution of food products from small to mid-sized producers. I will say that this isn't an either-or proposition in which we have to create an alternative distribution system. In fact, most food hubs are working with what would be considered traditional distributors aggregating product for them because the demand is so high, and these traditional distributors are just banging their heads against the wall. How do we get more local? And food hubs are offering a solution for them. So again, there's really some really great opportunities for complementarity between what food hubs are doing and the existing distribution system. Some of our research initiative going forward, I mentioned the economic impact assessments. We're doing some work with Cornell and creating, I think, a pretty robust model based on data on the ground to use to assess the economic impact that food hubs are having in their communities. We're doing our own group, because we have an architect on staff, actually doing some facility design work around food hub warehouses to understand the cost, the operations capacities. I get a lot of questions from folks about, they're going to make an investment, how much square footage do they need if they're this type of operation, or should they get into light processing or not? So we're hoping to provide some of these case study examples to provide some guidance in that area. And the survey that's really being commissioned by Michigan State University and the Food Hub Collaboration, the survey's been completed, the results are in, and really we just hope to get those preliminary results out to the public by early September. We have a number of resources for food hubs specifically, and there's 3 there mentioned. The Regional Food Hub Resource Guide I mentioned before, and there's a kind of a companion piece, the role of food hubs in local food marketing, which our partners over at Rural Development put together, and gets a little bit more into the business models and best practices. And here's some of the websites. And you'll all get this presentation, so we don't have to go too deep in any of this stuff, but that's where you would find those publications. And we are happy to send hard copies for free if you get tired of straining your eyes on the computer screen. So you can just contact me and I'd be happy to send you any hard copies of those publications on the last slide. And that is it. So I will turn it back over to Eleanor.
All right, thanks, Jim. Just really quickly to close us up here in the last few minutes, I want to just jump on to what Jim was talking about regarding resources, and he mentioned a couple of really great ones that we've got through the Food Hub portal website that AMS Jim's shop runs. In addition to that, I want to go back to the Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food website that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. This was a website that we put together a few years back as a sort of one-stop shop for folks who are interested in understanding all the different ways that USDA can be involved and is involved in local and regional food systems work. So it's accessible. You'll see the URL down there at the bottom of the screen, but you can also get to it just by going to our homepage, usda.gov, and in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see our little tomato, or is it a pepper? There's a debate going on, icon with Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food. You can click on that and you'll be right into the website. And what this website has is a list of nearly 30 at this point grant or loan programs that can be used to support local and regional food related projects. When you click on one of those URLs, you will see an easy to understand summary of the program, information about eligibility, an example of a real-world project supported by the program that's related to local and regional food, and then ideas for other types of projects that this particular grant or loan might support. And then there's also links to the main website for the program, so if you're interested in finding out more about the application process, you can be directed straight there. And so, for example, what you're seeing on the slide here to the left is the page that has our list. You can't see the full list there. And then to the right is one of the links that I clicked on. This is our Rural Business Enterprise Grant Program through Rural Development. You'll see the summary there. It gives an example of a mobile livestock unit that was developed in upstate New York with RBEG support. And then that photo is of a truck docking next to the mobile unit to transport the product. So that is the first part of our website. And in addition, I should say, to the grants and loans page, on this piece of the website, we also have a tools and resources page. And that is where you'll find things like our most recent local and regional food research, the Food Hub portal website that Ag Marketing Service runs, which will have all of Jim's resources on it, stuff specifically for farmers, through some of our farm-focused agencies, and a lot of other resources there as well. And then on the next slide, here we have our other main communications tool, which is also accessible from the same website, and this is called the Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food Compass. One part of this compass is a narrative that kind of fleshes out the different programs that are listed on the first part of the website, talks a little bit about case studies and examples of how those programs are being used in the field. The other part of the compass is our map, and frankly, I think it's one of the more exciting things that we've developed, and I hope that you agree. This includes data on USDA-funded local food projects since 2009. So we looked across those 30 grant and loan programs, and we pulled out all of the grants and loans that we've given related to local and regional food, and we mapped them. We also put additional, what we're calling context data on the map. So this is data that USDA collects, not necessarily all folks we've funded, but it has the farmers markets that we collect information on through our National Farmers Market Directory. It has food hubs and slaughter facilities and wholesale markets and a bunch of other information. And then last fall, we actually added project data from 9 other federal departments. And this was our attempt to figure out what was happening in other parts of the federal government. And in fact, there was a lot more going on than we realized even related to local and regional food. And that's also now on the map. It's not a complete list, but it's a start. It's updated regularly. It is actually overdue for an update. So if you go onto it now, you'll probably see that it's missing some of the data from the end of last year. But we're looking at updating it in the next month or so. So please check back later on this year for a revamped, easier to use, and map with lots of additional data there. And here's an example of how you can explore the map and find synergies and new information about things that's going on in your own community that you might not have known about. This is just a zoom in on the area around Blacksburg and Roanoke, Virginia. And what I did essentially was click on a bunch of dots, and you'll see it pops up with a box full of information about that particular project. Don't worry about all the words. The point here is just that there's some interesting synergies going on. So we have in the Roanoke area, we have a brownfields planning grant that came through EPA that's actually working on some planning for land use in the urban center and around the transit corridor, which is part of around their railroad, essentially. And they're really interested in looking, as part of that grant, at local food as a component of the planning process, whether it's farmers markets in the downtown urban center or even using the rail corridor as a way to get some of their food in. So that's happening in the city. Then in the broader region, there's a Department of Housing and Urban Development regional sustainable planning grant that also includes a focus on land use policies with an emphasis on local food. So those are two different federal partners who are involved in this space here. Then we've got, through a USDA program, we funded Virginia Tech to do training with local producers to increase their production of locally grown produce later into the year. So that's going to increase the supply. And then finally, through a different USDA program, we're funding a nonprofit that's actually building infrastructure for food storage and implementing systems to get food from farmers to food banks, farmers markets, and distribution centers to help low-income folks get access to that food. So there are some very interesting synergies, and this is the kind of stuff that you might not otherwise be able to see, but you've got it all here on the map. And the last slide, I believe.
Eleanor, I just wanted to give you a time check here and make sure we have time for questions.
Yep, I am finishing up right now. The last slide is just, I wanted to mention to everyone that you can search the map for keyword or for a specific zip code radius. So if you know that you're interested in doing a specific kind of project and you want to see what programs other people in the country are using in order to fund that kind of project, here I thought, maybe people would be interested in a small business incubation project. So I just typed incubator into the search box. I got 39 different projects. You can click on those dots and again figure out the different kinds of grant and loan programs that folks are using to support that work. And in fact, in each of these boxes, there's a link to the organization that received that grant or loan so that you can connect with them and learn a little bit more about how they did that. So it brings us to the end. I think the last slide, has our contact information. So please know that both Jim and I are available to answer questions at any point. We'll take a few now, and then do feel free to get in touch with us over email or phone as things move forward.
Thank you so much, both Jim and Eleanor, for all your effort that went into this. I wanted to briefly explain again how folks could ask questions. At the top left of your control panel on your webinar platform, there should be a little hand, and that will allow you to place yourself into a queue. In the meantime, I believe that the folks at Fay Penn have worked out their audio issues, so I will turn back to Bob.
Welcome. Can everybody hear me?
We sure can.
Hello? Well, I want to welcome everybody. Apologize for the speaker issue earlier, and I'd like to thank both of the guests that did a very good presentation and an overview of Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food. Here at Fay Penn, we've been working on a number of projects. We have a buy local program. We are a nonprofit, but we're also working on a regional food hub also, and a food co-op, also an incubator within that. And then we have a relationship right now developing with our Penn State Fayette to do a 3-year beginning farmer program. We have a business park that we have dedicated 10 acres to helping with beginning farmers to start producing food for the local market. It's mostly fruits and vegetables to start with, but we're hoping to integrate some livestock projects also. So it'll be a 3-year program with a certification at the end of it. So that's a little bit about us. And again, thanks for everybody that's attending today.
Bob, thank you. It was a little hard to hear you, so because of that, I'm going to ask the first question that I know you wanted to ask. So, Eleanor and Jim, is there assistance or guidance or funding for community nutrition education programs through your program?
For community nutrition education?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of different programs that USDA has that can support nutrition education at the community level, and some of those are going to be listed on the grants and loans page of the Know Your Farmer website. There are obviously going to be programs that do not specifically focus on local and regional food systems that are available to help with community nutrition education, and those are mostly going to come through the Food and Nutrition Service at USDA. So what I would say is a good place to start would be on the Know Your Farmer website to look at the list of grants and loans, look at the Food and Nutrition Service section of that list, and there's actually a memo that is a good narrative of a bunch of different programs through Food and Nutrition Service that can be available to help with community nutrition efforts. The other one I would recommend is also listed on that website, and it's under the section for USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture, or NIFA. They have a program called Community Food Projects, and that brings together a lot of community stakeholders to work on developing and planning and implementing a community food systems project. But a number of those have a nutrition education component and are focused on both bringing more local and regional products into the community and then also helping educate members of the community about how to use them. And finally, I would say our new Farm to School grant program, which I mentioned in the presentation, can do quite a bit around nutrition education, specifically with school children. So that program is new as of last year. It's not open right now for applications. The application window just closed in May. And so they're going to be awarding a new round of grants. But at the beginning of next year, look out for that program, because that can help school districts and producers come together to develop the kinds of programs that can help kids understand what they're eating, how to eat more healthfully, and how to cook food.
And one thing I would add to what Eleanor said, which was all great, was, utilize the Compass map. Like, go ahead into the search function and put nutrition education and see what pops up there. Because then you've got real, real-world projects, and then you can link those projects. Say, oh, how are these projects being funded? Oh, that's a Food Nutrition Service. Oh, this one's actually over National Institute for Food and Agriculture, and begin to see what projects most match what you were kind of thinking of, and then that's another kind of way of navigating the system.
Great, good. Okay, thanks. Sean, are there other questions?
We don't. I know that the folks over at FAPEN had one, so we'll try this again one more time real quick with the audio here. Go ahead, Bob.
Yes, thanks. Can you hear me better? Is that
a little,
better? Can you
a little
hear me
bit.
Better now? Well, I'll try to speak up louder. The question I had, we have a lot of farmers in our area. They're mostly row crops, things like that. Under the Farm Bill being still in limbo, how do you see the department with some of the programs that you have talked about, and you listed a number of them, but like the beginning farmer, is there ways that if something would happen that this Farm Bill doesn't get extended or reauthorized with some additional funding in certain areas, how can we help beginning farmers get into local food production?
Yeah, that's a great question. Jim, do you want me to start on this one?
Yes.
Okay. The situation with the Farm Bill is definitely making things very difficult, both for us and more importantly for folks in the field who are trying to implement really good projects and don't have funding available. I would say of the programs that are available through USDA for local and regional foods, only a few of them are currently without funding. Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program is one very important one that is currently unfunded. Another very important one is the Farmers Market Promotion Program, which Jim mentioned earlier. So those two are definitely leaving some gaps. I would say, again, a good way to figure out other programs available to support beginning farmers would be to go on the Compass map, search Beginning Farmer, and see what projects pop up and what programs they are using. Because there have been folks who've used a variety of different programs, whether it is our Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program to do farmer training that is focused on beginning farmers at the farm level, to, there's certainly been rural development support that's gone for helping beginning farmers get started through, maybe a RBEG, a Rural Business Enterprise Grant that can help with some planning processes for new farm businesses. I'm just trying to think of some other ones. But
well, one of the other ones that's huge is, and Bob, you probably know this, is the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program.
Mm-hmm.
That's administered. It's an agricultural marketing service. My agency administers that program, but the money does go to state departments of agriculture, and that money's available and is often used for farmer. It has to deal with specialty crops, but beyond that, it has been used from everything for helping train beginning farmers, for food safety, of course, for the marketing and promotion of a variety of specialty crops. So that's another good program.
And I guess the last one I'd mention is through our risk management agency. There's a risk management education and outreach program. They've actually been doing quite a lot with beginning farmers, and they've done stuff like train them on food safety, compliance, train them on business planning and risk management, other risk management training. So that's another really good opportunity. But yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's been difficult, and it'll continue to be difficult until we get a farm bill.
Sean, any questions?
I do, actually. Leanne from Bally had one. Leanne, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, thanks, Eleanor and Jim. This is great information, and I've been looking at the KYF Compass, actually, as you've been talking about it. This is just a great resource. I'm wondering, we at Bali are really interested in driving capital to local business owners and to local farms who are deeply rooted in communities. And you said earlier that you've awarded over 3,000 loans this year. Can you talk just a little bit about what kind of loan funds are available and what kind of criteria you have for those funds?
Well, I think that particular one I was talking about, the microloan program that we launched at the beginning of the year. So that's through the Farm Service Agency. It's specifically for farmers, and it's up to $35,000. So it's smaller than some of our other loans, and it can be used for purchasing equipment, for just getting some credit there so that you can buy seeds and stuff at the beginning of the year. It's pretty flexible in terms of the types of activities on the farm that the money can be used for. The other good thing about the microloan program is it has a streamlined paperwork process, because it's really targeted to the smaller beginning farms, and so it's much less of a paperwork burden than some of our other loan programs. But in terms of driving capital to businesses beyond just the farm, Jim, do you want to jump onto that piece of the question?
Well, I mean, you may know some other ones too, Eleanor, but I mean, one of the larger ones we have is in rural development, which is the Business and Industry Loan Guarantee. So it's not a loan, but it is a loan guarantee up to $10 million. And this is when you're getting into larger, obviously, food businesses, whether that's a facility or a fairly large food hub. That's there. There is some. It typically is supposed to go to a rural business, although there is some movement that it could actually be used by a business in an urban area, but ensuring that the benefits do go to, say, rural producers. We're kind of working through that one. There's community facilities, which is also in rural development, which offers a loan program. Typically, that's for very small rural communities, 20,000 or less. I'm sorry, 20,000 people or less, and typically hasn't been used as much for food-related projects. It has more to do. It has been, funding things like health clinics and libraries, in some cases food banks. But there's been a new move to kind of, see what they can do in actually using those particular loan funds to fund actual other types of food businesses. Eleanor, I'm sure there's others.
Well, I think those are the big ones. And then just back to the farm level, in addition to the microloans, there's farm ownership loans, which can be up to $300,000 to actually help purchase a farm. There's operating loans that can be a source of operating capital every year for the farmer. And then I mentioned also our farm storage facility loans, and those have, again, traditionally not been used for local and regional so much as things like building a grain silo. But in 2010, we clarified that it can be used for on-farm cold storage for fruits and vegetables. And we're really hoping that we can increase the number of folks who are using that loan program for that purpose.
Great. This is Sean. I have a couple more questions that were messaged to me. One person, Jessie in Alberta, Canada, I was wondering if you had any contacts that you would suggest for her in Canada.
Tell Jessie that I would be happy if she emails me. I have began to build a bit of a network of our northern neighbors who have gotten particularly interested in Food Hub, but just generally food systems work, and I'd be happy to link her to other folks that I know there.
Great. And just so everyone knows, again, we'll distribute the slides with all the contact information on them as well. And then we had another quick question. This was from Rachel. Her question was, are there any examples of food hubs that are private or publicly owned partnerships?
There's a couple. We have a few food hubs that actually would be more typically considered wholesale produce markets but offer often retail services, like often a farmer's market, and then they classify as a food hub because they're actually coordinating, managing a certain amount of aggregation and distribution from the market. And some of those are a public-private partnership. You know, the city owns the land, but it's run by a private entity. You know, that type of thing. Usually, the other example I would say is there are a few food hubs, and I think this is going to start growing more so, that were either founded by a nonprofit and then they spun off an LLC that they wholly own. And then, so there's a couple examples of that. And then the opposite, where you have a for-profit food hub that starts a nonprofit so that they have more opportunities to access funds to do more kind of community and producer strengthening work. And I'd be happy with this particular person. If you email me, I can give you some specific examples.
Great. That's all of the questions that I had.
This is Richard. Okay, great, good. And this is Richard Iveland from ASBC. Question is how sort of what, based on your experience, what are some of the mechanics that local farmers in any given town or city can pursue to help build out a stronger food economy? Is that working with the town council? Is that working with the mayor? Is that land conservation committee? What are some of the ingredients to make your vision happen at the local level?
Eleanor, you want to start that, and then you can I can follow up, and you can, because I know you need to go in a couple of minutes, but.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a really good question, and I think there's a couple different ways. One is actually to get involved in the USDA structure at the local level. So we have both our Natural Resources Conservation Service and our Farm Service Agency have local committees that help make some of the decisions and set the priorities for the way that funding is allocated through those programs locally. That's a really, really important way for people to get involved, particularly those who are involved in local and regional foods, to make sure that there's an element of that that's reflected in the local priorities that are set for the programs. So that would be one recommendation. Another one, which I'm sure Jim can speak to more eloquently than I can, is the types of convenings that we can all help put together to bring the producers together with the buyers, to help both parties understand the kinds of the elements that go into making a successful food system, both in terms of the types of products that should be grown, that are being demanded, and the quality assurance practices and the packing and the other things that the buyers really need in order to be able to take that product. Those are the kinds of, we've actually helped convene some of those meetings at the local level, and I think that's something that certainly local entities, whether it's an economic development council or a town council, can help facilitate too. So Jim, why don't I turn it back over to you?
Yeah, and just to expand upon that, I mean, I think there's certainly a number of community-based organizations, nonprofits that are, as well as public entities, they're well suited to kind of create these type of convenings. And again, this idea of connecting the producers to the buyers is in some ways to kind of demystify some of the barriers that may not really exist, but just people think they do, and how you can kind of begin to harness those relationships and build what ultimately needs to be a market-driven food system. Subsidies are there to help inject a certain amount of energy and capital to get things up, seed businesses, but ultimately it's about producers being able to find adequate and successful markets for their products.
Okay, good. That's helpful. Well, it is 3 o'clock there in Washington, and I know that's what we had asked you, Jim and Eleanor, to be with us for an hour. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon. And we have these slides, and we'll send these out to folks. Is that right, Sean?
The slides, and I will send them out, yes.
Sean, you still there?
I am here, yes. We have the slides, and I'll happily send them out.
Okay, good. So I was just asking, we'll be sending these slides out to participants on this call, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, can't hear you, but we will be in touch with you all. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody, today. And if you want to learn more about the American Sustainable Business Council, we are at asbcouncil.org. Be very happy to talk to you further, and thank Leanne and Bob very much for helping with the call, and Eleanor and James, thank you both for spending